All right, let's dive into some of the weirdest shaped countries that have ever existed throughout history. From sprawling empires that seem to have no rhyme or reason to their borders, to tiny city-states tucked away in odd corners of the world. These countries are some of the most unusual when it comes to their shape and geographical location. So let's start with some of the ancient and medieval oddities, shall we? First, Tang Dynasty, China, 618 to 907, a peak of irregular borders. Let's kick things off with one of the most influential dynasties in Chinese history, the Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty was a massive empire stretching from modern-day China all the way to Kazakhstan. But its borders were all over the place. Thanks to wars, conquests, and rebellions, the empire's shape was constantly changing, looking more like a jigsaw puzzle than a neatly drawn country. What makes it so interesting? Unlike today's nations with clear borders, the Tang Dynasty expanded based on military conquest and strategy, not geography. It's a perfect example of how power didn't always come in straight lines. Second Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, 1569 to 1795, a massive, oddly shaped union. Next up is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a huge, odd-shaped state that existed from 1569 to 1795. This massive political entity united Poland and Lithuania. The borders of the Commonwealth were incredibly disjointed. If you were to look at a map, the Commonwealth didn't have a nice, compact shape. Instead, it was more like a patchwork quilt, stretching from the Baltic Sea in the north all the way to the Black Sea in the south. It had a lot of disconnected territories, each with its own administrative and political structure. The territory seemed like it had been haphazardly pieced together, and because of its size, it often faced internal struggles with control and centralization. Third Ottoman Empire, 1299 to 1922, a vast, disconnected empire. Moving on to the Ottoman Empire, which lasted for over 600 years, its shape was something of a geopolitical mess. At its peak, the empire stretched across 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. You would think that such a large empire would have neat, symmetrical borders, right? Wrong. The Ottoman Empire had many exclaves, territories separated from the main landmass, and enclaves, small territories completely surrounded by another country. This gave the empire a highly disconnected and irregular shape. Imagine a pizza with random slices cut out and scattered across multiple countries. That's the Ottoman Empire. Fourth Kingdom of Jerusalem, 1099 to 1291. A stretched Crusader state. Let's head back to the Middle Ages with the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a Crusader state that existed from 1099 to 1291. Now, picture this. A thin, elongated strip of land stretching along the coast of the Levant. This kingdom wasn't a large landmass, but rather a very narrow strip of land awkwardly placed between the Holy Roman Empire and the Fatimid Caliphate. What makes the Kingdom of Jerusalem so weirdly shaped is how it was essentially built for religious wars, rather than natural expansion. The kingdom was more about holding onto the Holy Land and keeping it out of Muslim control, which led to a very stretched out and awkward territory. It was never a well-rounded country, but rather a strategic wedge in the Middle East. 5. Byzantine Empire, after 1204, fragmented and enclaved. After the Fourth Crusade in 1204, the Byzantine Empire shattered into small, scattered territories across Greece, Turkey, and the Balkans. Once a mighty empire, it was now a fragmented mess of enclaves and breakaway states like the Despotate of Epirus and the Empire of Nicaea, all claiming to be the true successor. Instead of a unified empire, the Byzantine world became a jigsaw puzzle of disconnected regions, struggling to hold on to their former glory. Sixth Golden Horde, 1242 to 1502, a Mongol realm of shifting borders. The Golden Horde, a Mongol successor state, ruled over parts of Russia, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine for several centuries. This empire was famous for its nomadic origins and its unpredictable expansion. The Golden Horde didn't follow a straight line when it came to borders. It was a sprawling territory with a strange, ever-shifting shape. Its territory expanded as far west as the Kievan Rus and as far east as modern-day Mongolia. But what makes the Golden Horde's shape so weird is the fact that it wasn't centralized. Instead, it consisted of several semi-independent khanats with borders that were difficult to define. 7. Duchy of Courland and Semigalia, 1561 to 1795, a Baltic duchy with overseas colonies. This one's a real gem. The Duchy of Courland and Semigalia was a small, weirdly shaped Baltic duchy that existed from 1561 to 1795. What's so odd about this duchy, you ask? Well, not only did it have a strange, elongated shape that stretched across the coast of the Baltic Sea, but it also owned overseas colonies. Yes, you read that right. The Duchy of Courland and Semigalia had colonies in places like Africa and the Caribbean. Talk about a weird combo of geography and colonial ambition. At its peak, the duchy was a tiny player on the world stage, but it had a highly irregular border that stretched from the Baltic coast to distant foreign territories, giving it an unusual look on the map. 8. Republic of Ragusa, 1358 to 1808, a narrow coastal republic. Imagine a country so thin that it's literally a strip of land along the coast. That was the Republic of Ragusa, a tiny, independent city-state located along the Adriatic Sea. It existed from 1358 to 1808 and had one of the narrowest, most elongated borders you'll ever see. The republic was sandwiched between the Ottoman Empire and Venetian territories, making it an incredibly strategic but awkwardly shaped city-state. Even though it was small, the Republic of Ragusa punched above its weight in terms of trade and diplomacy, but its thin and long shape made it a unique oddity in the world of countries. 9. Maratha Confederacy, 1674 to 1818, a fragmented collection of states. The Maratha Confederacy was a collection of princely states and autonomous regions that rose to prominence in 17th century India. The Confederacy wasn't a single, unified country, but rather a loose federation of various states that came together to form an alliance. This meant the Maratha Empire had a disjointed and fragmented shape. Not one unified landmass, but several states scattered across the subcontinent. As a result, the Maratha Confederacy's shape looked more like a patchwork quilt than a cohesive kingdom. 10th Sikh Empire, 1799 to 1849, a blocky, awkward North Indian empire. On number 10, we have the Sikh Empire, a force to be reckoned with in the Punjab region of northern India. The empire was at its peak from 1799 to 1849 and had an oddly blocky shape. Unlike the long, narrow states we've seen so far, the Sikh Empire was a compact, square-shaped kingdom. But its irregular borders came from the fact that the empire had to constantly defend its territories from British invasions and neighboring Afghan rulers. The empire expanded and contracted based on these conflicts, creating a kingdom that was unevenly shaped. The Sikh Empire may not have had the sprawling borders of other empires, but its irregularities make it a fascinating case in the history of India's kingdoms. 11th Czechoslovakia in 1939, a weird, disjointed shape. In 1939, Czechoslovakia had one of the strangest shapes in Europe. After Sudetenland was handed over to Nazi Germany, and Slovakia became a Nazi puppet state, the remaining Czech lands were left landlocked and awkwardly cut off by Poland and Austria. Its borders looked jagged and uneven, a direct result of political deals and war. After World War II, Czechoslovakia was reunited, but by 1993, it peacefully split into Czechia and Slovakia, finally creating clearer borders. 12th. East Prussia, 1525 to 1945, a disconnected exclave of Germany. East Prussia was a German exclave that existed from 1525 until the end of World War II in 1945. Imagine this. A territory of Germany completely separated from the rest of the country, wedged between Poland and the Soviet Union. Geographically, East Prussia was about as disconnected as it could get. It didn't even share a border with Germany after World War II. This weird shape existed because of historical territorial shifts and border changes. At its peak, East Prussia stretched into what is now Kaliningrad, a Russian exclave that still exists today. The odd part of East Prussia's shape came from the fact that it was essentially a German region surrounded on all sides by foreign territories, making it a very isolated area. When World War II ended, East Prussia was split, with the Soviet Union taking its eastern half and Poland annexing the western portion, leaving the once powerful region practically erased from the map. 13. Free City of Danzig, 1920–1939. A tiny city-state trapped between giants. Picture a tiny city-state sitting between Poland and Germany. That was the Free City of Danzig. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles created this unusual independent city in 1920, meant to be neutral and controlled by the League of Nations. However, it was a very awkward creation. The Free City of Danzig was smaller than a modern-day county, wedged between two much larger countries. This weirdly shaped city had the Baltic Sea to its north, but the surrounding territories were controlled by Germany and Poland. It was like a tiny island of neutrality with borders that made absolutely no sense from a geopolitical standpoint. The city was surrounded on three sides by Poland, and its long, narrow shape added to its oddity. 14th. Saar Protectorate, 1947–1956, a temporary, awkward piece of France in Germany. After World War II, the Saar Protectorate was established under French control as a weird anomaly. This small region of Western Germany was carved out of the Saarland and was controlled by France for almost a decade. At the time, Saarland's borders were just as weird as its political status. It was located right on the French-German border and was a highly contested area due to its coal mines. The Saar Protectorate wasn't a country in the strictest sense, but it was a French-controlled region with its own government and currency. Its borders were definitely out of the ordinary, forming a narrow, elongated strip of land between France and Germany. The strange borders were only resolved in 1956 when Saarland rejoined Germany, ending its odd political anomaly. 15. Neutral Moorsnet, 1816–1920. A microscopic territory of Belgian and German dispute. Neutral Moorsnet is one of those tiny weird microstates that could have easily been missed on a map if you weren't looking closely. Situated between Belgium and Germany, this minuscule region existed from 1816 to 1920. Its existence was the result of a border dispute between the two countries after Napoleon's defeat. The Neutral Moorsnet region, just about 3 square kilometers in size, was set up to be neutral, hence the name. It wasn't a fully independent country, but it was a neutral zone with its own governing body, and it was home to a zinc refinery that was vital to both Belgium and Germany. This weird little territory was eventually absorbed into Belgium in 1920, but its borders, and the fact that it was essentially an independent sliver of land, made it a very odd and short-lived anomaly. 16th. Kingdom of Mysore, 1399–1947, a blocky South Indian kingdom. The Kingdom of Mysore was an important regional power in South India, lasting from 1399 to 1947. What makes Mysore so weird in terms of shape is that it wasn't long or elongated like some kingdoms we've seen. It was compact and blocky. Its borders weren't particularly organic. They had more to do with military conquests and political decisions that created a rough square shape. 17th. Congo Free State, 1885–1908, a vast Belgian territory with a strange shape. The Congo Free State is one of the most controversial and strangely shaped territories in history. Founded by King Leopold II of Belgium in 1885, it was essentially his personal possession rather than a true Belgian colony. The Congo Free State was massive and about 76 times the size of Belgium, but its borders were drawn without any consideration for geographical cohesion. The irregular shape of the Congo Free State was the result of imperial desires rather than strategic thinking. It stretched across Central Africa from the Atlantic coast to the landlocked heart of Africa, creating a massive, disconnected territory. Its borders were so unnatural that they seemed almost random, with no clear line between the Congo and surrounding colonies. 18th Sultanate of Zanzibar, 1856–1964, a tiny island kingdom with an irregular shape. Zanzibar was a small island kingdom off the coast of East Africa, and it had one of the most peculiar shapes you could imagine. The Sultanate of Zanzibar was a coastal kingdom that was not landlocked, but what made it weird was the way it stretched along the coast with a narrow, curvy outline. It was almost like a strip of land running along the Indian Ocean. What makes Zanzibar's shape even stranger is the fact that, despite being a small island, it controlled key territories in East Africa, including parts of the mainland. Eventually, Zanzibar merged with Tanganyika to form Tanzania in 1964, ending its odd existence as a kingdom with a curvy coastal territory. 19th Emirate of Bukhara, 1785 to 1920, a Central Asian kingdom with irregular borders. The Emirate of Bukhara was one of the main powers in Central Asia from 1785 to 1920. This landlocked emirate was ruled by a local emir and had one of the most irregular and fragmented territories in the region. The Emirate of Bukhara covered much of modern-day Uzbekistan, but its borders were anything but neat. It was surrounded by empires like Russia, Persia, and Afghanistan, which made its borders a bit of a geopolitical mess. The Emirate of Bukhara was a buffer state between these larger powers, and its shape was often dictated by military and political alliances rather than natural geography. In 1920, it was taken over by Soviet forces, and its bizarre territory was absorbed into the Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republic. 20. Transnistria, 1990 to present, unrecognized, a disputed territory on the edge of Europe. Transnistria is a self-proclaimed country that exists between Moldova and Ukraine, but it is not officially recognized by any other country. What makes Transnistria especially weird is its incredibly narrow, elongated shape. It stretches along the Dniester River and is a thin strip of land that gives it a serpentine form. Transnistria declared independence in 1990, but since then, it has been a frozen conflict zone with no formal recognition. Its shape is purely the result of historical and political factors, and it's still one of the most peculiar political anomalies in Europe today. 21. South Yemen, 1967 to 1990, a weirdly shaped country before merging with North Yemen. Let's talk about South Yemen now. It's a country that existed from 1967 until it merged with North Yemen in 1990 to form the Republic of Yemen. If you look at the map, South Yemen had one of the most oddly shaped territories. The country stretched from the Arabian Peninsula's southern coast, bordered by Saudi Arabia to the north and the Indian Ocean to the south. However, its shape was long and thin, almost like a slinky wrapping around the corner of the peninsula. This strange, elongated shape was again the result of both historical and political decisions. The country was established after British colonial rule ended in the region, but it wasn't a perfect fit with neighboring states. The narrowness of South Yemen made it a geopolitical oddity, and eventually, the two Yemens were unified, leaving this unique, slender country behind. 22nd Republic of Texas, 1836 to 1845, a skewed, exaggerated shape with disputed borders. Next, we have the Republic of Texas, which existed as an independent nation from 1836 to 1845 before joining the United States. The shape of Texas as a sovereign country was peculiar, resembling a skewed rectangle with borders that were constantly disputed. Texas's territory was much larger than it needed to be, covering parts of modern-day New Mexico, Oklahoma, and even Colorado. The borders were never clearly defined and were frequently in conflict with Mexico, leading to the Mexican-American War and the eventual annexation of Texas. 23rd. West Berlin, 1949 to 1990, a democratic exclave trapped inside communist East Germany. In the middle of East Germany was an odd little exclave known as West Berlin. Between 1949 and 1990, this small section of Berlin became an island of democracy in the heart of a communist state. The borders of West Berlin were entirely surrounded by East Germany, making it a strange geographical anomaly during the Cold War. West Berlin had an unusually compact shape, but its geographical isolation was what made it strange. It wasn't just a border between ideologies. It was a physical separation of the world during one of the most turbulent times in history. West Berlin became a symbol of the division of Germany, and it's a reminder of how political decisions can shape a country in weird and unexpected ways. 24th. Kingdom of Araucania and Patagonia, 1860s, a self-proclaimed nation in South America. The Kingdom of Araucania and Patagonia was a short-lived and bizarre self-declared kingdom in South America. Founded in the 1860s by a Frenchman named Aurélie Antoine de Tunin, this kingdom was formed from the territories of indigenous Mapuche tribes in southern Chile and Argentina. The territory that the Kingdom of Araucania and Patagonia claimed was huge but also highly irregular and unrecognized by any other nation. The kingdom's borders were drawn from the imagination of Taunans, who had no real control over the land, and the country never functioned as an actual state. Still, the kingdom's bizarre shape and its very existence are a reminder of unconventional attempts at sovereignty in the modern world. 25th. Hutt River Principality, 1970 to 2020, Australia. A self-proclaimed country with a quirky shape. The Hutt River Principality was a self-proclaimed independent country in Australia that existed from 1970 to 2020. This little micronation was founded by Leonard Castley, who declared the area he owned as an independent principality. The Hutt River Principality wasn't a traditional country. It was just a small farm in Western Australia. Still, it had its own government, currency, and even passports. The borders of the Hutt River Principality were oddly shaped, mainly due to the boundaries of the farmland and the government's desire to claim sovereignty over this tiny piece of land. While it was never recognized as a country, it existed for 50 years as one of the most eccentric examples of border weirdness, demonstrating that sometimes border claims are more about personal ambition than geopolitical logic. 26th Republic of Cospaia, 1440 to 1826, a tiny Italian village that accidentally became its own country. Imagine living in a tiny village that accidentally becomes its own independent country for centuries. That's exactly what happened with the Republic of Cospaia, a small Italian village that became an independent republic in 1440 and lasted until it was absorbed into Papal States in 1826. The story goes that the village was unintentionally left out of political agreements between the Papal States and Florence. As a result, Cospaia became its own independent entity, with its own government, laws, and even a currency. The borders of Cospaia were strange, not because they were drawn that way, but because no one ever bothered to claim or control them for hundreds of years. 27th. Kingdom of Loango, pre-colonial West Africa, a narrow, elongated kingdom. The Kingdom of Loango was a pre-colonial kingdom located on the Atlantic coast of Central Africa, in what is now Gabon. It had a thin, elongated shape that stretched along the coastline, with its borders defined more by the natural geography of the coast and the political influence of surrounding kingdoms. What makes Loango stand out is the slimness of its territory. It wasn't a broad, expansive empire, but rather a narrow kingdom wedged between the sea and other kingdoms. This territorial arrangement, though seemingly simple, created a unique geopolitical shape in the history of Africa. 28th. Free Territory of Trieste, 1947 to 1954, an international zone caught between Italy and Yugoslavia. The Free Territory of Trieste was an international zone created after World War II to resolve the territorial dispute between Italy and Yugoslavia over the city of Trieste. The zone was established in 1947, and for a few years, it had a bizarre, fragmented shape. Trieste was geographically awkward because it was a port city surrounded by both Italy and Yugoslavia, making the borders very tricky to define. 29. Hundreds of Indian princely states, pre-1947, tiny, oddly shaped independent states across India. Before India's independence in 1947, the region was divided into hundreds of princely states. These tiny, semi-independent regions, ruled by local kings, had some of the weirdest borders imaginable. Each state had its own shape, often defined by natural geography or historical treaties. Some of these states had shapes that seemed almost random, long and narrow, jagged and scattered, or sometimes almost like little isolated islands in the middle of larger territories. These oddly shaped states were part of a patchwork that was eventually unified into the modern Republic of India. 30. The Holy Roman Empire's scattered microstates, 800 to 1806, a jumbled collection of tiny, irregular states. Finally, we end with one of the most bizarre political entities in history, and that is the Holy Roman Empire. At its peak, this empire included over 300 tiny states, duchies, and principalities, each with its own borders and unique shape. These microstates were scattered across Central Europe, from Germany to Italy to parts of France. The Holy Roman Empire's borders didn't follow any sense of geographical logic. Instead, they were the result of political agreements, inheritance, and historical claims. As a result, the Holy Roman Empire had a patchwork of irregular borders, with each small state contributing to the empire's overall jumbled appearance. Which one surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history's strangest borders, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating geography content.